Welcome to Tattoo Tabletop. My name is James, and today we are ranking the easiest armies to get started in Warhammer 40k. Now, we have 11th edition coming, so maybe you are somebody who is looking at starting fresh in Warhammer 40,000, and 11th edition might be the time that you're jumping in. I am here to hopefully help you decide what faction is best for you. So we've got a nice little tier system here. We're going to go through it, but basically we're going to look at S being easiest to start, easier, might struggle, you can make it work, and oof. Oof are the ones that are obviously going to be a bit more difficult depending on all things considered. So let's see if I can help you figure this out, and let's dive into it. But if you, of course, if you like this content, feel free to like, share, subscribe. I massively appreciate it. Let's go. So first things first, Adeptus Sororitas, Sisters of Battle. So in terms of painting, you're looking relatively simple. You got, well, obviously one of the main iconic looks of them is the black armor, a couple details of filigree there, white hair, a lot of faces, but there are some helmets that you can obviously put on them. In terms of your model range, you do have a decent size, not the greatest, but not terrible. They are, the big thing being you are toughness 3, but you have a lot of melt-a-guns to back it up. And you can also use some tanks and transports and stuff like that. If I was going to rank the sisters, the Adeptus Sororitas, the nuns with guns, I would say that they are easier to start with. Just because, you know, there are a few extra bits and details to them. They do have some models that are extremely difficult. You have like the Triumph of St. Catherine and stuff like that. But for the most part, what you're going to be putting onto the table could be easy enough to turn around, I think, in a decent time. And in terms of your rules, you have Miracle Dice. That's going to be something that maybe helps you earlier on to, you know, help just like, oh, I'm just going to plug this in here. Less rolling involved. Pretty solid rule for them. I mean, honestly, a great rule for them. Miracle Dice are a pain, but I think they're a little bit easier. And of course, that could shift. So, but for right now, I'd say Adeptus Sororitas in A tier, the easier side of things. Not the easiest, but easier. Next up, Adeptus Custodes, the banana boys, the golden boys. They are your elite units. They are obviously the defenders and the spear of the emperor. They are, you know, 2-up save, 4-up inbound, plenty of wounds. They've got a lot of good abilities to them. The range is not terribly extensive, which could be a good thing in a case of someone getting started for the first time. And of course, they are very durable. They're very tough units. Now, they can be killed. So if you make rough mistakes, then you will lose with them. But as far as an army goes, painting, getting up on the table, there are a lot of details on there, but there's also just a lot of gold. Adeptus Custodes, they are one of the easiest to start, in my humble opinion. I think that their limited model range makes them very easy to make decisions on. And on top of that, they are a very tough unit. When it comes to playing, you're gonna feel you're gonna probably feel very tough. You have your 2-ups, you have your 4-ups, and you're gonna feel pretty good. So again, a lot of this we don't know what the rules are going into the next edition, but Adeptus Custodes have played this way for a while. There are things that can kill them, but they are a very easy army to get started with. Adeptus Mechanicus. Next, we're going to Mars. So Adeptus Mechanicus. They have a lot of doctrinas. They have a lot of doctrinas, and they are very built around having auras of influence to help boost their army. There are people who make a lot of tokens for AdMech to try and keep track of them. There is a lot that can go on with them. Now, despite what it might look like, I honestly think painting AdMech can be very, very quick. Specifically because you can just prime them black, dry brush your metallics, paint the inside of the cloak, paint the red of the outside of the cloak, and you're pretty much there. If you want to pick out some more lenses and stuff like that, you absolutely can. There is a higher ceiling that you can go with AdMech, but for the most part, they are very easy to kind of get started. They do have an okay range of models. I mean, they're obviously all could use more, but I think as a whole, your complexity with Adeptus Mechanicus is going to be in your gameplay. It's going to be those doctrinas, those auras, remembering those certain abilities, things of that nature. But as far as it goes, easy to paint, in my opinion. I would put them in the easier tier, but I think that might be a little misleading. So I think just on the rules alone, you might struggle. They can perform extremely well, but they do have a lot of complication to them, a lot of detail, a lot of minutia, as you would anticipate. So I gotta say that they'd probably be in B. You might struggle. But of course, if you love the Tech Priests of Mars, go for it. So that's a big one there. Eldari. Big ol' Eldari, the big elves. Um, they can be an incredibly fun and rewarding faction to play. However, they've also got some pretty decently they have a pretty high skill ceiling. If someone's good with Eldari, there's usually a lot of reps in there. There's a lot of time spent on them. Using your battle focus tokens and things of that nature. It can be very, very difficult to get very good with Eldari. But I will say, in terms of like painting, for the most part, depending on which model you're looking at, your aspect warriors, one color. There's not a ton of filigree detail. Even something like the brand new Fuegan and stuff like that, there's a good amount going on there, but not so much that I would say it's overwhelming. You do have some very strong abilities. You have fire dragons, you have warp spiders, and of course, if you just love the elf factions, I still love the Howling Banshees. I absolutely still adore Striking Scorpions. I think they're some of the coolest models in the elf side of things as far as aspect warriors go. Striking Scorpions all the way. But I would say that they have a high skill ceiling. So when that comes to that, if you're getting started and this is your very, very first faction, there is a decent amount to the range. There's quite a few HQs and things of that nature. I would say brand new starting out, you can make it work. That one might change up to might struggle just because, I mean, the big thing, let me just preface this by saying this. We've only gone through 4 factions, but if you have read up on the faction, you love the aesthetic, you've painted a test model, you really thoroughly enjoy it, stick with it. Regardless of what this says on here, you're probably going to still enjoy it, because the things that keep bringing me back to armies is there's plenty of armies that I've lost tons and tons of games with, but I love the way I painted them. I love the lore around them. I'm going to keep playing them, and that's not going to change. So keep that in mind. But I would say Eldari are going to be in the mate. You can make it work, specifically because when it comes to playing games, you are going to be fighting an uphill battle. There are things that are tougher than you, and that can just drop you if you even move the slightest minutia out of way. And especially since we're going into what looks like to be a very combat-heavy new edition, there are some tricks that the Eldar can do, but Eldar really want to shoot you and move and get out of the way. So we're going to start there. Next up, the Astra Militarum. You're in the guard now, son. This is a faction that I have just started not terribly long ago, so this is feeling particularly fresh. As far as Astra Militarum go, there is a lot of units. There's a lot of models. There's a lot going on with them. You have a lot of variation as well. When you buy a Leman Russ kit, you have 7 or 8 Leman Russ variants, something like that you can build out of that. Now, there are ways to potentially build like 1 or 2 of them based on being able to build a second turret, which I have done on a few of my Astra Militarum tanks. I think they're also very fun, and they can appeal because they are the humans, right? They're the normal people day to day who are trying to fight all these, chaos corrupted space marines, these xeno species that they never ran into, internal corruption. There is a motivating factor to it. There are tons of books on them. There's plenty to listen to take in. I love my Death Corps of Krieg. They are still some of my absolute favorites. They do have a lot of data sheets, so if you don't completely know what you're doing, they can be a little tricky to get started into. Also, when it comes to looking at the faction and looking at the simplicity of getting them up and started, I would say that they can be difficult. Now, if you just do all tanks, sure, you can do all tanks. That's no problem. And as far as painting tanks go, they're not the most difficult things in the world. I actually managed to paint mine up pretty decently quickly, which I was pleasantly surprised with. But when it comes to like even just infantry and Cadian Guard, painting through even 20 Cadian Guard, especially like the newer sculpts, can be kind of difficult. There's extra details in there that you don't really notice until you really start painting. There are still some ways to paint them decently quickly. I found a pretty decent way to get them up and on the table. Spoiler alert, though, it doesn't involve painting their faces. And Cadians have faces in the wider group. They have a ton of them. That's what makes the Krieg, I think, a little bit faster, is they're all wearing the gas mask. It makes that bit a little bit easier. But even then, they still have a few details. So for me, And again, after Militarum, your infantry, you're looking at T3. There's a ton of guns in there, and your mixed loadouts can also make it very difficult. You're going to spend time looking at your models and going, okay, I have 2 multi-guns from here, 1 from the command squad, 1 from this unit, and then I'm going to have 2 plasma guns because I added 1 from this and 1 from this, and then I have 3 plasma pistols, and you're going to be doing a lot of that. And in terms of movement and stuff like that, unless you're doing all tanks, it can be a little bit tricky. So for me, Astra Militarum goes into Might Struggle. I will say, if you're over in the UK, it's probably easier for you to start Astra Militarum, also financially, because it is significantly cheaper over there. I understand why there's more Guard players over in the UK, because I saw the prices on the kits over there. And yeah, it's pretty easy for you to get started. Over here in the US, maybe you're going to maybe try and find a couple battle boxes and stuff like that that come out, and you might be able to snag yourself a little bit better of a deal. But for the most part, trying to get started in Guard is a lot. And even right now, I have an okay amount of Guard, but I have nowhere near the amount of Guard that one would need to feel comfortable going into new editions, going into new rules, and feeling like, okay, I've got all the tools I need. I can just bring this to the table. So I think that's why Guard go into the Might Struggle. Again, Eldari, I think, again, they have very, very strong abilities, but the harder part being is they are less forgiving, as opposed to Guard have tanks, and they have tons of them, and they are strong, and they can really help you punch up into things. So that's why Astra Militarum goes into the Might Struggle. Next up, we have the Black Templars. Now, Black Templars, I did not have before. I started them when they did get the refresh, so when they got the launch box of that with their one of their OG covers, which is absolutely fantastic. And they are probably one of my favorite armies. They are a blast to play. Their stories are great. I love their artwork and everything like that. They are a very unique Space Marine faction. I mean, Space Marines in themselves are kind of a wider, easy to get started kind of a situation. And we'll cover that when we get to them. But for the most part, the big thing that's going to separate Black Templars is you're going to have black armor primarily, which is going to make life easier. And depending on how you do the shoulder pads, you're either going to have like a cream color or you're going to have a white color. Always do the white, don't do the cream. Lesson. I hate when people do that. It's white. It's white. But Black Templars are a lot of fun. And of course, with the upgrade sprues, it does make things a little bit easier because you do have the special shoulder pads that are in there so that you can actually, just like paint over it, as opposed to trying to have any freehanded or trying to do decals. Black Templars are also my first army that I painted in more traditional GW standard, where I painted it all black and then I edge highlighted the panels twice, one with like the darker color and then a few spots with the brighter color. And I picked out a lot of details. I'm very proud of my Black Templars. I thoroughly enjoy them. And I will say, in terms of your stats, you're dealing with some pretty simple stuff. The only time that it gets a little complicated is when you're talking about Crusader squads, where you have your neophytes, who are the scout-looking guys that are in there, and then you have your initiates. Your initiates are the ones that are actually doing okay. They have a standard 3-up save, blah, blah, blah. Your other ones have 4-up save. So when it comes to allocating wounds and stuff like that, it gets a little complicated if you have a bigger bulk of them, and you kind of got to roll them out individually. But for the most part, I would say Black Templars, easier to get started with. Number one, you have access to the entirety of the Space Marine book, which can be a little complicated, but for the most part, if you're running Black Templars, you are running Black Templars because you love the Black Templar specific ones. You love the Crusader squads, you love the Sword Brethren, Emperor's Champion, Halbrecht, absolutely iconic and incredible characters, phenomenal sculpts. They were a lot of fun to paint. I thoroughly loved them. And of course, now with the way that the new book works, if it's a power weapon, you got lethal hits. If it's a chain weapon, you've got sustained 1 pretty much. So it's very, very easy to kind of remember, and I think they are very easy to play. Black Templars goes into the A tier. Next up, we got the Blood Angels. Blood Angels, another Space Marine faction that get a lot of play. Very popular. They've got a very aggressive play style. They like to run, they like to charge, they like to do all that stuff. And of course, you have things like the Death Company. In there, you have a lot of great characters. Astra at the Grim, Dante, Lamarties. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. I think Blood Angels is a decent enough one to start. I mean, a lot of your Space Marine factions will probably fall under this easier tier to get started. There isn't a ton of filigree coming with them, and I will say one thing that is going to separate them kind of definitively, I mean, most of the stuff that should be coming in the launch box should be just pure Space Marine, you know, flexible to be used for any of the Space Marines. But with the Blood Angels being a focus for the 11th edition launch box, I gotta put them into easier. Just on the pure basis that number one, you're Space Marines. So you're dealing with 3-up save most of the time. You are still dealing with that wide, massive roster of models available to you. But I think there's also a lot more Space Marine players out there that will be able to kind of guide you if you join a community and just be like, hey, I'm looking at starting. What kind of units should I be looking at? You're going to find a lot more community feedback on that. And of course, them being a focus for the 11th edition launch box means that you'll have some stuff available to you. And I'm sure you'll get plenty of painting guides. I actually found painting my Blood Angels was actually pretty easy, which was super, super nice. I did sell them a while back, and also they got rid of Gabriel Seth, so they're permanently dead to me until they bring him back. Flesh Terrors for life. So, but as a whole, they are very easy to start with. So, Blood Angels go up into that A tier. Next up, we got Chaos Space Marines. The Traitor Legions have all banded together, and they're all in one book. So, I don't know if we're going to get them completely fleshed out, or we're going to have a Night Lords or anything like that. I sincerely doubt it. So they'll all be roped into the Chaos Space Marines book. Now, Chaos Space Marines, they do follow a very similar trend to Space Marines in terms of there's a lot going on with them. You have a 3-up save most of the time. There's a couple things you have in there, cultists and stuff like that that are going to throw things out there. Right now, your current army rules the Dark Pact ability. You know, make a battle sec test, and if you fail, you get this. And so on and so forth. Basically, it's still not terrible. They're a pretty fun faction. I really haven't gotten a chance to play them much, but you know, in terms of looking at their data sheets and stuff like that, they're going to be a pretty decently easy one to grasp. However, there's a lot of trim. You've probably heard jokes about the Chaos Space Marine trim, and it is real. I did paint the entirety of my Night Lord's force in a week, and it was brutal. Like, I remember towards the end, my brush is fraying, everything's falling apart. I use this specific model, and like, I tried to do this, I tried to do that. I still think they look pretty good. In terms of my other armies, though, they're probably not my best looking. They just have the most distinct style to them. But Chaos Space Marine trim is a real struggle. It does hold you back. So for that, they go into might struggle. Now, they wouldn't go down into here specifically because when you look at the points cost and things of that nature, your Chaos Space Marines aren't running a horde based army, really. You're using your vehicles, you're using some of your larger monsters. There's gonna be plenty in there to bring your points up so that you're not bringing a ton. So you won't have a huge amount to paint, but the amount that you do have, you're gonna do chaos trim, and you're gonna have to deal with that. There's ways around it. There's plenty of tricks. Obviously, look to your YouTube tutorials to try and get Chaos Space Marines quick, and they are very fun faction, but you might struggle to get them on the table, so they go right into the middle there with might struggle. Next up, we have Dark Angels. Dark Angels are one of my personal favorites, as indicated by my arm. I don't know how clear that is. So they were my very first models. I got the Start Collecting 8th edition Space Marine box with the Terminator Captain and the Dreadnought and the Tacticals. And I got a box of Deathwing Terminators because they are cool. So Dark Angels also do fall under the easier side of things when we're looking at them, specifically because they do have their own specific units. It's not terribly extensive. You have some Ravenwing units. You have a lot of HQ units. You have a Primarch. You have the Lion. And he is a fantastic model. He's got fantastic rules. I absolutely love him. Again, still one of my absolute favorites. So for the most part, and there's really not a ton of filigree or detail to go into them where it doesn't feel too painful. I mean, most of your Deathwing Terminators are just swapping out some different iconography as opposed to having a full filigreed, nonsense looking model. Even your Deathwing Knights are actually pretty decently easy to turn around. So they're actually pretty quick. Your points are costed appropriately. I think that they are a really good spot. So I think that under Dark Angels, they fall under easier as well. Again, not the easiest, because again, I will say with a lot of Space Marine factions, you're going to fall into that easier category, specifically because of the roster. You have a ton of units, and sometimes if you're someone who's doing this by yourself, having to comb through all those can be very tricky. But I mean, the best way to move forward with those is look at some of the example lists that you've seen out there that have done okay, or just look at the stuff that you're like, that looks cool, and run that. Rule of cool is always going to trump any sort of competitive. Obviously, you can feel bad if you roll really poorly or if something's not, particularly good. But for the most part, I think that it still changes around. So But Dark Angels, easier to start. Death Guard. Death Guard are in a very unique spot. Their books have been very good. Their newest book has been pretty good. For any of the Chaos specific ones, I will say this: the Death Guard have less trim. They still have trim, but they have less trim. And the one thing that's going to be very beneficial in terms of your painting is looking messy is a plus. Like, you are the nasty Nurgle boys, right? So for the most part, you're actually gonna feel, you're gonna like maybe make some mistakes on some of the model. It might look a little grimy, you add some rust effects or something, and it's going to fit. There are factions like that where not having super clean look to them is going to be very, very good for it. It's going to make it look good. But for the most part, I think Death Guard is one of those factions that does do pretty well. You're pretty decently points costed. You can bring an okay amount, but for the most part, I think you're going to be okay. There might be a ton of detail onto them, but there's a lot of ways to get around it. For right now, I think I'm going to put Death Guard actually in the easier side. Specifically just because there are a lot of details to it, but again, if it looks gross, if it looks dirty, if it looks messy, that's kind of how it's supposed to look. So it might help you out if you're brand new to painting and stuff like that. And of course, Death Guard models feel very tough. It's going to give you a good kind of sort of power fantasy in terms of, you're going to move up to this center objective and they're going to try and shoot you off, and you're going to be able to do a few things to help protect yourself and to feel disgustingly resilient as it was. So I think they go into the easier category. They go above Chaos Space Marines specifically because of those reasons. Drukhari. Drukhari, I think, are my favorite, one of my favorite of the Xenos factions. They have a lot of things going on for them. I think they are a lot of fun. They are also, just like Eldari, very, very skill heavy. Now, I think that they've got some really cool tricks to them. You have a phenomenal person like Archon Scurry to help guide you through it, to help make it much more accessible. But if you like the evil elves, the ones that cause the pain, that feed off the torment of others, and especially their aesthetic, I will say this: the one thing that I think is going to actually knock them up, because that sounds wrong to say, the one thing I will say for Drukhari is specifically, I've been able to paint a lot of them very, very quickly. In terms of Kabalites, I worked out a recipe that was very quick. They have not a terrible amount of detail attached to them, especially their main troop units. They can actually be converted and set up and painted in a pretty quick consistency that I think it makes it a little bit easier to get started on them. You do have witches, which have a little bit more detail, but again, not a ton. Your racks are a little bit different. They've got a weird vibe to them, but for the most part, I was able to paint them like a skin color, paint the bone, and then do a wash, and I called it good. So there is a decent way to get them up onto the table pretty quickly. You have your paint engines that are a little bit more complicated, but even your boats are actually pretty easy to get started. So for me, I actually think Drukhari goes into the Might Struggle. The Might Struggle is more so from the rule side of things. They can be particularly rewarding if you get particularly good at them, but they can also be extremely punishing if you move out into weird spots. I do think they have a decent melee threat with their witches and with their incubi, but they also very heavily lean into shooting, so it'll be very interesting to see how they do into 11th edition. Again, I think that there's going to be a decent amount that's tweaked with Drukhari and some of the other ones that, when it comes to their shooting, they're hitting on 4s, because if you're shooting something in cover, it's now a minus to your ballistic skill, so you're hitting on 5s unless something changes. So I'll be very curious to see what happens with that. But they have some decent melee threats, and again, the only reason they're in the Might Struggle is purely because of the paint ability. I think they're actually decently easy to paint up, and of course, if you want to make them look fantastic, there's some very great ways to do that. So they go up. Emperor's Children, the weird little pervs. So Emperor's Children got new models. They now have a nice little set to them. There's a lot going on with them. There's pretty fair amount of detail, but I will say surprisingly not overwhelming, where it's not going to be particularly brutal to have to deal with. I mean, there are some models like Noise Marines and stuff like that that are going to have a lot more filigree, going to have a lot more abilities and a lot more things going on with them, and specifically painting that kind of pink purple, depending on what you're trying to go for, The original Emperor's Children would seem to be a little bit more purple, and then in the Heresy, and then now they seem to be a bit more hot pink. Um, but it honestly could be, moved either direction. It kind of depends on your preference. You obviously paint your models however you want. But they also have a bunch of new models for them that are very specific to them. So there's a great appeal to them. Some people love the Emperor's Children. Some people who like that's their absolute favorite Traitor Legion. And I think that they do have some pretty strong abilities. You've got a big demonic Primarch. You've got Fulgrim. He doesn't make it into lists super often, but it's still a cool model. It adds a lot to it. For them, they do still have a decent amount of Chaos Trim, but not as much. Specifically in a lot of their design, it seemed to be that they moved away from a lot more of the Chaos Trim, which is great. But pink can be very hard to paint. They kind of straddle right in between might struggle and you can make it work. I'd say just because of the rules, I think they go under the might struggle. I think they follow the same pattern as Chaos Space Marines. I think they might be a little bit easier to paint, just because I think they have a little less trim on some of their models, but they also do still have plenty, and they do have some interesting, unique shapes and stuff like that go along with them. But they do have some very cool, unique models. And again, Emperor's Children fall in that same boat as Black Templars, where you have access to the wider Chaos Space Marines on some things, but for the most part, you're just running your own list. Actually, that's not true. You can't run any of those. So for Emperor's Children, I think you do have your limited set list, and I think that they're easy enough. Gene Stealer Cults. So you're looking at essentially the quote-unquote human portion of Tyranids. These are the guys that are create cults within hive cities. They corrupt them. They use their gene technology, and of course, they have the many-armed god. They are very horde, uppy, downy, inny, outy, defensive, like that kind of army. They can be very squishy. They can also do some decent damage. There is a lot going on with them. And I would say, in terms of their ability to pick up and get started and get running with it, I think takes a little bit longer. Just because even some of your vehicles have a little bit more complication to them, a little bit more detail to them. Some of the models you can probably convert pretty quickly, like Gene Stealers. Gene Stealers themselves, very good contrast models. But for the most part, you're still going to have a bunch of other models involved in there because they are a lower points cost and they do a lot more things. And their army mechanic is a little bit more involved. So for me, Gene Stealer Cults goes into you can make it work. More specifically, just because of the things that they have going for them. And again, you're running a horde army, and you're going to paint them. Getting them battle ready is going to take you a little bit longer for them, and also just getting comfortable with the rules. Again, there's also a good amount of T3 in there, and in a good few spots. But again, if you believe in them, if you love the many-armed god, and you look forward to Ascension Day, then Gene Stealer Cults is going to be the pick for you. But for me, I gotta say, you can just probably make them work. It's nothing too bad, but gameplay wise, they could take a second, and painting wise, they could take a second. I just had caffeine splash into my eye, straight into my bloodstream. Next up, we have the Grey Knights. Grey Knights are a very fun faction. They're obviously the anti-Psyker or the Psyker variant of the Imperium. They hunt demons. They have some very, very cool stories. They have some very, very cool models. Some of them are a little bit older. You've probably seen the baby carriers, the Nemesis Dread Knights, which are always very funny. But in terms of your faction, you do have a 2-up. You have a 2-up across everywhere, which is also great. Your rules can be pretty decently strong. You can do particularly well with them. They have a limited mono range, so there's not a ton of decision with them. So you're gonna feel big, you're gonna feel bulky, and you are elitely priced, so you can fit a decent amount, but also you're not gonna spend a ton on them. The big difference would be the painting side of things. There can be a lot of extra details and filigree and things associated with them. However, I will say, if you were inclined to try and just get Grey Knight started, you didn't care about doing the special effects on some of the weapons and stuff like that, the Nemesis weapons that the Grey Knights are so famously known for, you can probably knock them out pretty quickly. And I'd say in terms of being a little bit easier, this is That feels right, but it also feels a little wrong because there is some complication to them. There are some people who have played Grey Knights over and over again, and they do not like their kind of gameplay loop and their gameplay style. And even with 2-up saves, they struggle. They are all about positioning. They are all about using their abilities appropriately. They can get some serious mortal wounds out there, but obviously there are also some stuff out there that are just flat out anti-psyker, and you have psyker attached on every keyword of your data sheets. That being said, nothing's really particularly tailored towards them, but I would say in terms of getting them started, again, your points cost, you put in a couple Dread Knights and you're already up there pretty quickly. Get a couple combat patrols and you're probably pretty covered. So I'd say, yeah, I think for right now we'll keep them in easier. We might make some adjustments later looking at it once I kind of get through all of it, but I'd say for the most part, that's a pretty fair assumption. You're probably going to spend the most time trying to get the special effects on the weapons, and depending on how you do that, whether you have access to an airbrush or anything like that, again, you're probably just getting started, so you probably don't. They can be kind of tricky to paint up and make look really, really nice, but for the most part, there are also ways to just kind of dry brush metallic all over, pick out cloth bits or whatever, and, you know, do a wash, and you're probably okay, right? They're metallic, so not too bad. Imperial Agents. Oof. They're going in oof. Specifically because of the fact that right now, as a faction, they're not seeing a ton of support. They got a book, but otherwise, the only reason people have that book, including myself, is for the assassins. If you wanted to use and ally the assassins into your Space Marine force and to another Imperial force, you needed that book. So they have a decent access to okay models, but for the most part, they're not really a fleshed out faction. That's kind of the really depressing part. They should be, and there should be more to them. I feel like Imperial Agents should be able to bring in specific guard regiments and stuff like that, just because that is what an Imperial Agent would do, right? Is they would, you know, go to a world that they suspect of corruption or anything else like that, point at the nearest commander and be like, you're giving me your troops now. Order of the Inquisition. So I think that they should be able to do a little bit more with that. Hopefully they figure out more for them for 11th edition, if possible. But right now, I would say as a faction, it's not one to really terribly invest in or to look at specifically because of that. I think that they are very tricky on that half. So right now, they're going into oof. They're my very first oof because of that reason, because there really isn't a ton of support for them right now, and they really, really it. So we'll just go to that. Imperial Knights. They're going up there. Why are they going up there? Well, so your startup cost for them can be kind of high because per Titan you're paying 100 and some odd bucks. In terms of painting and making look really nice, there are ways to make them look very nice, I will say. In terms of getting them started, though, you only need a couple models. You get some of the 3 or 4 big boys, you're done. That's it. No more models to buy. And you can take all that extra time to magnetize, you know, loadouts, to up your painting skills. There's a lot you can do with them, but also in terms of getting them on the table, your in-between parts that are all the metallics, you literally just prime black, dry brush metallic, that's done. And then you just figure out what you want to do for the panels, for the color scheme. You can come up with some pretty cool stuff. There are obviously some absolutely immaculately painted Imperial Knights, but for the most part, though, they are very easy to get started on that front. There's really not a ton for them. So I think as it goes, Imperial Knights, and I'd actually say even Chaos Knights also go up there. Very similar vibes to both of them. They have what I like to call the Gargants thing, where, you know, in Age of Sigmar you have Gargants. Gargants are essentially Imperial Knights. They don't really shoot, but Imperial Knights do. And in terms of getting started, they're going to be very easy for you to pick up and start running very, very quickly. You're going to get to 2,000 points before you even know it, and you can spend all that extra time trying to paint them up and make them look extra nice. Leagues of Votann. So the Kin, they are in a very interesting spot. Newer faction that has come back in. I love my Leagues of Votann. I think they are a lot of fun. There's a lot of good stuff with them. They did very much shift. They started from a very, very elite army in 9th edition, where you had a very limited amount that could do a large amount of damage, to a bit more horde-like, which does make them a little trickier. In terms of painting them up, I think they're fun to paint. I don't think they're actually too bad. but they do have a lot of extra bits and details, especially if you look at something like the Brokir Ironmaster and his his three Ironkin models with him. There's a lot of extra filigree and detail and weird bits in there where it's just like, oh, there's this glowing light, this panel, this thing, this thing. There's a lot of detail to them. You can help make life easier on yourself by just putting all helmets on all your Hearthkin warriors. But for the most part, I would say as a Horde army, and as a Horde army goes, they have just a wee bit too much detail on a few things to make it a little bit difficult for you. But overall, in terms of the rules, I think they're actually pretty solid. You're T5 across the board, and then you go up from there, so T6, T7, etc. Your Hekaton land fortresses are absolute ballers, do plenty of damage. There's some pretty decent rules to them. Your yield points aren't too complicated, and they've got a decent amount of detachments to go along with them. And in terms of your range, you have a pretty fair amount, but not enough to overwhelm you. So I'd say just in terms of like the painting and some of the other bits, I would throw them under the might struggle. Just because, again, in terms of getting really good with them, they do have some strong toughness and things like that. But there are also a lot of things out there that can absolutely just drop them like it's hot. And your Hernkin warriors have 1 wound apiece, which I also still find very weird. Your T5 and your 1 wound apiece as opposed to orcs that are 2 wounds. I suppose you have like a slightly better save, but not by much. So for me, Leagues of Votann go into the might. You might struggle a little bit, but it's not going to be anything that you're going to feel like you're climbing over. And of course, if you're a dwarf person like I am, Leagues of Votann ended up becoming a non-negotiable. Very easy, loved them, and I've absolutely loved playing them ever since. I think they're probably one of my best factions, ironically. All right, Necrons. One of the easiest to start. Why is that? Well, I think there's a lot of boxes out there that have a ton of Necrons in them, and in terms of your painting and what that looks like, incredibly easy. Prime black, dry brush metal, pick out green, done. Like at that point, you have that there. Now you do have models that do have a lot more detail. You do have like the Silent King and things of that nature, but for the most part, you can still knock out a lot of that through those dry brushing steps. And then when you get into airbrushing and stuff like that, you can really up the quality on there. But for the most part, I honestly think it is very, very easy to start Necrons. Rules, they've been doing very well. You now have Catans. You probably are getting another Catan replaced at some point. I can't remember the last one. The Deceiver, I think, is one of the last ones. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong. If I'm wrong, yell at me in the comments. But so we got one more in Catan coming for them, but I think the Necrons are sitting in a great spot. And again, I think they are very easy to pick up and to go. So Necrons, they fall under an easiest to start because of that. I mean, you will definitely have more models than Custodes, more than likely, depending on what you're running. And definitely more than Imperial Knights. But again, for the most part, in terms of your starting cost of like getting them started, of doing that dry brushing, getting that green, you'll be able to get that army onto the table pretty quickly. And bringing back models feels very, very satisfying with Necrons because they are decently tough. So then when they do get eliminated, you're like, all right, cool, I killed a decent amount, and then they come back. And that feels very satisfactory as opposed to, some other factions that I can think of, not even just in 40k, but in Age of Sigmar. When you're dealing with like zombies and stuff like that, you feel no pains, or in this case, they're called wards, but it's kind of easy to wipe out an entire unit and not be able to bring back enough to actually help yourself out. So I think Necrons are a little bit better about that. They give you that power fantasy of they'll die, but they'll come back. And they're also still decently tough. So Necrons, easiest to start. Orcs. Where do the orcs sit? So the orcs have a ton of models out there. There's a ton of stuff, but you've got your staples, you've got your boys, you've got your Gazgul, Megurk, Thraka, you've got your battle wagons, your trucks, your war rigs, kill rigs, like stuff like that. You've got the Beast Nega variant of the boys. You've got knobs. You've got mega knobs, stuff like that. There's a lot to the orcs. Now, big up for the launch of 11th edition. You are in the box. You're the other half of the box. Orcs are the other half of the box, and that's really great. There are a lot of extra finicky details on some of the orcs, specifically around their weapons and stuff like that. Not so much their armor, which is really nice. They maybe have like a symbol stamped on there, or like welded onto there or something like that. But for the most part, your detail isn't terribly complicated, and a lot of your stuff you can probably just paint metallic and do like some contrast over it to give it like a color, because that's essentially what the orcs would look like. Again, they follow that same rule as Death Guard. The dirtier they are, the more it kind of still makes sense, because they are a ramshackle force. They literally throw things together that shouldn't work, and they work. They build a truck and they're like, this should start, and it does start. That's very fun. Also, orc players, you just have fun. Even if you lose, even if you get stomped, I have yet to meet an orc player that just has a genuinely bad time. Like, they're every single one of them has an absolute blast. Every time I played my orcs, it didn't matter if I got stomped, if I stomped, or vice versa. They're a lot of fun. You're brand new in the box. Honestly, even though you have a fair amount into that book, for me, orcs goes under easier, specifically because you are in the 11th edition launch box, and also because I think they are a lot of fun. I painted up a lot of my orcs in one go, and honestly, I didn't get really super sick of them, which was actually pleasantly surprising. Once I figured out my skin recipe and everything like that, I had a blast painting them up, and I found fun ways to add texture and detail and pick out the blue that I liked. And some of the vehicles are some of my favorites. The two greatest words that I've ever heard in all of Warhammer 40k are Boomdaka and Snozwagon. I love them. So orcs for me, they go up into an easier. They are a horde army, but I think they're a lot of fun. So I think their rules very straightforward. Wah, run, charge, tie things up, careen into things. They're a lot of fun. Hopefully their Cult of Speed stuff should be getting a nice update here. Will make them fun. And of course, orcs consistently get new things, just because they are a very big, very fun faction, and you're being the main antagonist for Lament means that they're going to be getting more. So you already got a new weird boy coming, and we got some new stuff, so I'm very excited for them. They go up into all right, the big one themselves, Space Marines. Well, Space Marines are, by their very nature, pretty easy to get started. So I think we can just real safely, we'll just put them up here. Now, why aren't they up here? Specifically because there is a lot of decision paralysis. If you're playing Loyalist, which is what you're doing in these Space Marines, specifically, well, you're playing the Codex Compliant. Let's say you're painting White Scars. White Scars moves you down to here. You're going to struggle. Actually, it might even move down to here because you're painting white. White is very, very difficult with some of the red details and stuff like that. That makes it very difficult. You're painting Ultramarines. They go up here. They're very easy to do. You paint the gold trim, super easy. It's a raised detail. There really isn't a lot to them. You can knock out a lot of Space Marines in a very short period of time. But, again, they fall under easier because the amount of options you have. Because your codex is so thick and so extensive, it can be kind of difficult to choose how to get started. There's obviously plenty of resources, and there are plenty of communities that can help you make those decisions, but you just have a lot, and you have a lot of choices, and it can lead to that decision paralysis. In terms of painting some of the things are very, very easy to paint. Some of them could take you a hot second. They are probably one of the biggest factions that do get started with, but in terms of easier, I would still say Necrons, Custodes, and Knights are a little bit quicker. You're gonna be able to pick up a little bit more with them, and I think that there's more that you can do with them as opposed to Space Marines. You might run into that decision paralysis, and even just for someone like myself, where I have Dark Angels, I have Black Templars, I have Space Wolves, I have Space Marine units, but then I'm taking these Space Marine units and I'm dividing them up against my Dark Angels, against my Black Templars, and against my Space Wolves. I'm splitting them out. So it means that there's a lot of times where I feel like I'm needing to pick up multiple kits. Now, if you're doing just Space Marines, then you're probably fine, but you have so many heroes from so many different chapters. You have your Marnius Calgars who are in your Ultramarines. You have your, what's his name? Athan Shan, who's, new for Raven Guard. You have Kyvan Strike, who's still Raven Guard. You have so many across all the different chapters that sometimes I think it can lead to a little bit of decision paralysis. So for me, Space Marines just goes into there. As far as your gameplay goes, it's as easy as it gets. You have power armor, you have a 3-up save, more than likely, and they're easy enough to get going. But I think the decision paralysis does put them in the easier as opposed to easiest, where it's going to be a lot. So, Space Wolves. Space Wolves also I mean, all your Space Marines are going to end up in easiest here, again, specifically because the Space Marine options that you do have attached to even the Codex Divergent ones, your Dark Angels, your Blood Angels, your Templars, and your Space Wolves. And also the Space Wolves armor can be kind of tricky to get right. I mean, there's some that go darker and will go for more of the heresy, like the actual gray armor of the Space Wolves. I eventually went to the baby blue specifically because Army Painter made Wolf Gray, and this actually covers. So I've actually gone through and I've been renovating all my Space Wolves. I thoroughly enjoy them, but also one thing that separates Space Wolves from the other ones is pack markings. So if you want to go the extra mile on them, painting of the pack markings are an extra little bit, and they have a good amount of yellow in some of their pack markings and stuff like that, so that could factor into your decision making as well, and they get a little bit more difficult. But in terms of your gameplay is easy. Space Wolves love to charge things, love to fight things. Your Thunderwolf Cavalry just can absolutely charge and wreck face into certain things. The hardest thing being they have to go around buildings and stuff like that. It's going to be very interesting to see how they shake out in the new edition. But again, with the new edition being primarily, the close combat focused sort of situation, I think that we're going to be seeing Space Wolves and Orcs and Blood Angels doing pretty decently on those layouts. Maybe even Black Templars. Who knows? But Space Wolves for me are also in the easier category. They're not terribly difficult to get started. There's some really great boxes out there right now, Combat Patrol boxes that have very Space Wolf specific ones that have Blood Claws, that have the Terminators, that have Wolfen, and so you've got stuff that's pretty accessible to you. And again, the only thing is going to be the decision paralysis on some of the wider Space Marine. Tau Empire might struggle. More so, specifically, they are very shooting heavy. They have some cool models for them, but I would say the big thing that's going to be harder is your startup is kind of tricky. I have, like, Tau is one of the armies that I do not have. Not one that I've been terribly interested in. But you do have things like the Kroot, and you do have Vespids and stuff like that, and you have the big war suits. There are decent enough ways to get started with them. I think their rule being the spotter and guided sort of mechanic makes it a little trickier and makes them a little harder to get started with and to really get running. But I think they can be very rewarding long term. Some people absolutely love them. If you're a Gundam fan, that's probably what you've been looking at, is more of the Tau Empire kind of stuff, because that's just kind of the vibe they give off. For the greater good, as it were. But I would say as a whole, depending on what you're kind of looking to run, even if you're all running all war suits, it's still a pretty fair amount of war suits, and so that takes a little bit of time, and also getting good with the shooting phase, making it work, figuring out your screens and stuff like that. You might struggle a little bit, and I think your data sheets are also in a few different spots as far as your stats in terms of regulation. So I think you're going to spend a little bit more time looking things up, as opposed to some of these where your profile across all of them is pretty much the same. Your Grey Knights, your Nemesis weapons are all 6 minus 2/2. The only question you need to remember is like how many attacks for them. But other than that, they're all very unified, very simple. These ones, I think you get a little bit more diversification, which does mean it does take a little bit longer. Not to say that you can't be great with them, and that might get easy. Again, if they are your faction, you like the fish and you want to do it for the greater good, Tau Empire is the go. And if you're doing Kroot, though, I will say you're going to put Kroot will be down here. If there was a Tau Empire 2 Kroot, I'd put it down into you can make it work. There's a lot of extra models involved in that, and there's a lot of extra time involved in that. But it is cool. People love the Kroot, so you move that down there. But otherwise, I'd say Tau Empire, you might struggle. Thousand Suns. You can make it work. Specifically because the Thousand Suns have a lot of trim. Like a lot. And there's just no way around it. I just had to paint some for a buddy for Patreon. Brady, finger guns. Even if you're, whether or not you're doing the traditional Thousand Sun scheme or you're doing something else, there is a lot of detail. Because even if you take out all the trim, then you still have like the patterns on the headdresses and stuff like that. And some of the iconography is kind of hard to read. I can't remember the exact model that I painted, but I remember on the back cape, there's usually like little trim marks to indicate like a border, an outline, or some sort of detail to it. And it went like this, and it was just like a line that went to here, and then it just stopped. like there was no connecting bit leading it back into that, so I kind of had to improvise with that detail. Um, but there's a lot of detail to them. There's a lot going on, whether you're doing Scarab Occult Terminators or even just your standard, Scarab Marines and stuff like that. There's there's a lot of detail to them. There's some good stuff in there. They do have some strong abilities and certain things that work very well for them. They can be an absolute tar pit to go through. But in terms of painting is your biggest hang up on them. There is a lot more to it, and it can be very, very tricky to get them started, to get them going. There's a couple tips out there, but on top of that, they have all the cloaks and all the extra bits on there that make them a little bit more difficult to get going and to get started. And I think that that's going to play into a major factor of it as well. Tyranids. Now, why easiest? Well, you have a lot of models. You have a good selection of models. Tyranids are contrast blessings. They are very, very quick to figure out. You prime black, you give them a zenithal, and then you just do whatever contrast color you want for their skin and whatever contrast color you want for their shell. And that's a lot of your work, especially on your smaller models. Your bigger models have some bigger details on a few spots, but for the most part, they're not terribly complex models. There's really just a lot of texture to them more than anything. They're not going to have weird amulets or trim or anything like that. They are a very direct faction. They want to just run up into your face, charge, devour the biomaterial. That's what they live for. And I think that in terms of actually playing them, they can be decently easy to pick up. There's a couple things that you probably need to figure out a bit more of in terms of gameplay wise. And I would recommend Maelstrom Wargaming, another YouTube channel. That is all Tyranids. Shout out to Craig. He's fantastic. I've been on his channel a few times, and he is a lover of the Nids, and he's done great with them. But I do think that they are an easier faction to get started with because you really can just, like I said, do the Prime, do the Zenithal, contrast, speed paint, what have you, and you can really get a faction going in a no time flat. There's really a lot to do there. And if you want to update them, you can absolutely do that. You can start with that contrast or speed paint base, and then you can literally just pick out the details as you're staying in that faction. So I think Tyranids actually do get a decent mark on easiest to start. They're in a great spot, and I think there's a lot of ways to get them started and get going with them. So they go up into S, easiest to start. Last but not least, we've got the World Eaters, and you might struggle. Again, they fall under the same basis as a lot of the Chaos Space Marine factions, minus the Thousand Suns. Specifically, the big thing with World Eaters is they are not a terribly elite army. They actually do still have a fair amount of models. There are times where you're going to run a lot of Khorne Berserkers, potentially. You're going to run bigger things, and there's trim. There's trim everywhere, but on the plus side, the thing that separates them from the Thousand Suns is they don't have these flowy capes. There's nothing associated with any of those. They're literally just power armor and trim and sprinting. There is a good amount of skin detail on them, but I think for the most part, you can do pretty easy enough things to get around it. Maybe just paint a skin color over there, do a speed paint wash over it or something like that, and it will look like skin. It'll look damaged. It'll look stretched. But again, if you want to express your skill ceiling, you absolutely can. The big thing being Chaos Trim. You have Chaos Trim. Your Chaos Trim is going to be a very, very hard thing. And it does take a lot of time. My only real advice I can offer to you is if it's really hard for you to get at it with the brush, it's probably pretty hard to see. Don't bother. Don't give yourself the aneurysm. Don't make the mistake and then have to clean it up. Just get the ones that you can see, do what you can there, and make it a little bit easier. There are some tricks that people talk about. I think some people have talked about priming them gold and then doing the red in the recesses or in the panels, the actual flat panel parts. I found that works okay. I have my own personal method that I think still works pretty well, and I actually would prefer to just pick out the individual trim and use it in a very specific way because there are just it's a specific method that works very well for me. I look forward to getting started on my World Eaters. I still got to build a lot of them, but I've done a test model and I was very happy with how he turned out and, the overall quality. So World Eaters, You might struggle with them, but for the most part, I think they're a very rewarding and very fun faction. Again, they're gonna go into a potentially melee heavy 11th, and they are ready to kill. So, and that's from what I understand, that was probably gonna be their primary objective: kill things, and they want to kill things. So, you should be good. All right, that's the tier list. Again, the ones that I think are easiest to start being the Imperial Knights, the Adeptus Custodes, the Necrons, and the Tyranids. Again, each one of them is more so because in terms of painting, they are decently quick to pick up, to get onto the table. The Imperial Knights might take you a little bit longer to build, just in terms of the extra pieces. But for the most part, you're just playing big things. When you get to a table, you only have to have 3 data sheets, maybe not even that, and that's all you're playing. Easy to remember. Custodes, same thing. You're going to feel very durable. You're going to feel very tough. You have a 2-up and you have a 4-up, and you've got some decent stratagems on them, and you can punch up pretty nicely. Necrons, again, the Resurrection feels very good. You do have models that are very easy to just really quick get started. Just Prime Black, Dry Brush Metallic, pick out the green bits, and you're golden. And same with Tyranids, Zenithal, or Prime Black, Zenithal, and then Speed Paint or something like that to really get them started. And you can have that kind of hard feeling to them. Easier, a lot of your Space Marine factions, specifically because they don't have a ton of the Chaos Trim situation going on, which really does help elevate them a good bit. I do think if I was going to rank the best out of this section here, that is probably the easiest to get started with. Just because of how we're looking, I would put Orcs probably here, and I put Space Marines here at the top. Again, Space Marines, very one color. You can even just Prime Black, Dry Brush, like do like a kind of like heavy brush of heavy dry brush of like your armor color, and that does 98% of your work. As opposed to the Orcs, you'll have a few more details, but you are in the launch box, and again, I still think Orcs are a lot of fun. So they would go up there as well. Sisters probably go a good bit back here because they do have a lot more details and things like that. And move that like that. And then, of course, the Might struggles. If you're looking at any of these factions, what you're probably looking at is probably the least struggly. In terms of painting, Drukhari go up. But in terms of probably gameplay and things of that nature, I would probably say CSM go up there. They're pretty easy to figure out, and they have pretty straightforward stat lines for the most part, especially if you're playing the Space Marines of Chaos Space Marines, as opposed to if you're doing Cultists. Again, you can make it work. Eldari, again, easy enough to paint. It's just when it comes to your first games, they are going to be very tricky. The only reason Drukhari moved up into the Might struggle is just because I think they're a little bit quicker to get onto the table and to get more done. And I think that's what makes them a little bit more flexible there. Genestealer Cults, very horde. There's a lot of extra details in there. And Thousand Suns, the big thing is the painting. The big thing is the painting, and it drives you down because there are so much extra details and stuff like that. Again, if you want to just ignore all the painting, all of this stays relatively similar just because these do have a little bit extra rules. The only oof we have is Imperial Agents, and realistically, I would also put Chaos Demons down there if it was in this tier list, just because specifically I think that what you're looking at here is just a completely different kind of thing. We don't know if Chaos Demons is going to make it into 11th. We'll find out. Because right now the Chaos Demons have been split appropriately. Your Siege Demons are in Thousand Suns. Your Corn Demons are in World Eaters. Slash ones with them, and etc. Like, everybody's getting divided up into the individual codexes. So we will see how that goes. But let me know what you think of the tier list down in the comments down below. Did you like this tier list? Do you want to see more content like this where I do more tier lists? I honestly wanted to do something like this because, especially since we have 11th edition coming, I really did kind of start thinking about what these factions mean in terms of painting and in terms of playing. I have an okay amount of these, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of talk about it. So let me know what you think down in the comments down below. And again, if you like this content, feel free to like, share, subscribe. I massively appreciate it. But if you are jumping into 11th, and hopefully this helped you get started on what factions you're going to start looking at. But once you get started, once you pick up your first models, once you get them built, I guess you're just going to probably have to go paint something.